Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about the worst zodiac sign placement, well, if there is one, and I'm going to let you know off the bat, I don't believe there is one, and I'm going to explain why. And when I'm talking about a zodiac sign placement, I'm talking about a planet or any other astrological energy in a sign. So that's all I'm doing. It's not anything in a house or anything else. What this is about, it's like, for example, Sun in Libra. So anyway, well, the first thing to look at, of course, when people, this is subjective, but people talk about, okay, the worst zodiac sign placement. Okay, the worst is seen as the planet in its fall, or if there's or any other astrological energy that may be in its fall. So I'm going to start off and give an example on this. Now let's look at the moon in Scorpio. The moon is in its fall in Scorpio. And being in its fall, of course, it's in the opposite placement of the exaltation for the moon, which would be Taurus. Now, the moon in Scorpio, well, it's in its fall, partly because the moon represents life and procreation. And Scorpio is the sign associated with death. Also, another reason, the moon is associated with the public. And Scorpio is a sign that's rather introverted, very secretive, mysterious, very reserved. They often have an aversion to the spotlight. However, it may be negative being having the as far as the position, but because it's in its fall. But Scorpio moon, for example, can also have positive attributes and characteristics. All right, so on the negative side, well, Scorpio moon could have rather convoluted emotions. They could have some strong vacillation with them, which is another reason perhaps it's in its fall, because Scorpio is a sign of extremism, and you have that distortion and vacillation with the emotions. But there are some in Scorpio. Could be very overly. Moon in Scorpio can be overly mysterious and sometimes vengeful, and really, this is something where you look at this placement, and like any other placement, it can have positive qualities to it. Moon in Scorpio can also have a profuse knowledge of occult and astrological subjects. I have a friend with the moon in Scorpio, and she loves astrology, and at least an aspiring astrologer, if not one. And I had a friend that was a moon in Scorpio and Scorpio rising, and he had a very strong affinity for the occult. It was funny, I remember him way back when he walking around with the Ouija board tied behind his back. He was a little bit eccentric, but he had very good knowledge of, I would say, a very strong affinity for those kind of subjects. And another thing too is that Moon and Scorpio people can also have an indomitable spirit, have inordinate willpower, be very resourceful. They could have a lot of fortitude and a lot of courage. So there are strong positives that are connected with this placement as well. And keep in mind too that someone with the moon in Scorpio, as the example of a fall placement in astrology, that can have the position in accidental dignity, or accidental dignity or exaltation by house position. If the moon in Scorpio falls in the 4th house, well, that would be in its accidental dignity by house position, because the 4th house, of course, corresponds with the zodiac sign Cancer. And if it has predominantly good aspects, well, you'll have a lot of positive elements of the sign come out, you'll likely have more positive qualities and characteristics of the sign come out as opposed to the negative ones and the negative manifestation of the sign. Doesn't change the fact that it still would be in its fall, but there are modifying influences, and keep in mind that it can move out. It moves out of the sign by progression, so that helps as well. And also, if the moon in Scorpio, say, is intercepted, that energy is likely not going to be expressed at its fullest anyway. That energy can be suppressed to some degree, although when it comes out, it could come out very strong, because as many of you know, when you have an intercepted planet, then that energy of that planet and sign might have some distortion in its expression. It could be suppressed for some time, then it could come out strongly at other times. If it's in a caden house, if it's in the 3rd, 6th, 9th, or 12th house, it won't come out as strong either. So those are some things to look at when you keep in mind if you're trying to analyze and try to ascertain what the worst zodiac sign placement might be. And also, it's important to remember, let's say that you have even a planet or astrological energy in its exaltation or in its dignity. If you have predominantly negative aspects to it, that energy could still come out rather negatively. You'll have some positive, of course. All signs and all placements are going to have positives and negatives, but you might be accentuating the negative a little bit more than the positive if it has more negative aspects as opposed to positive. Like, let's take, the sun in Leo. Of course, the sun would be in its dignity in Leo. But let's say it has a lot of bad aspects and has more negative than positive. Then the person might be expressing a lot of the negative characteristics of Leo, such as wanting everyone to revolve around them, so to speak, the arrogance, being egotistical, being overly showy, overly attention-getting, just to name a few, overly extravagant, maybe even a compulsive gambling type syndrome. So really, it's really important to look at this, people, because I think there's a misconception out there when a lot of people, they'll say, oh no, I got this planet, it's in its fall, it's in its detriment. Oh no. You have to factor in the whole chart and take the whole chart into consideration when you're looking at this. So, and even the sun in Leo is another example. Let's say it's in a caden house. As I stated before, the caden house is the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th houses, which I call like the mutable houses. That energy can be weakened and diminished. And I think especially the 12th house. That's just my opinion on that, because that's that restriction and limitation house. That energy can be a little bit diminished in those houses, so it may not be expressed as strongly. So, and also the sun in Leo, if that's intercepted, well, then you might have a little suppression of that energy as well. So, and I'm going to do one more example. I talked about the moon in Scorpio. Let's take Mars in Cancer. Okay, Mars, I have the Mars in Cancer. That's in its fall. There's a lot of people out there who think that's one of the worst placements. And in a way, by itself, you can make an argument of that. Because you have the planet of anger, and then you have Cancer, a sign, and Mars, it can be about confrontation and combat. Cancer is almost just the opposite. Cancer can be very passive, and they really could be rather reserved about showing that really combative side and that aggressive side. So when Mars is in Cancer, well, the person is more likely to brood and pout than let their anger out constructively. It can often be even taken out on family members. It can come out in a rather negative way, and when it comes out in a very overly emotional and acrimonious manner. Mars in Cancer can be very temperamental, can be very fickle, inchangeable, very moody, and the Mars in that placement is not that great. But as I stated, like with the Moon in Scorpio, Mars in Cancer can have positive qualities, such as a strong family defender, such as injecting a lot of energy into home activities, into things connected with nostalgia and tradition, things that are associated with the family, showing that bravery for family members and that courage and fortitude for them. So, and also by progression, it can move out in time. And if it has predominantly positive aspects, you'll bring up more positive energy with that sign. Like I said, with Moon Scorpio, it doesn't change the fact that it's in its fall. It's still, it's a negative placement based on the planet in connection with the sign, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have any positive qualities. When you have at least the fundamental knowledge of astrology, that's half the battle, people, because then you know about the positives and the negatives of the placements, and you could utilize and accentuate the positives with them as opposed to the negatives anyway. So that's really what I wanted to get at as far as that goes. And also Mars, and another example thing with Mars in Cancer, like the Moon in Scorpio, you could have that planetary placement in its fall by sign, but it could be modified by house placement. If you have it, say, in the first house, you would have it in its accidental dignity. Had a prominent family member that had, she had the Mars in Cancer, perfect example, Mars in Cancer, but she had it in the first house. And I mean, even though a lot of her anger was suppressed, she still showed a strong ability to be outspoken and be forthright and have certain courage, and really not put up with a lot from others, even despite having a Cancer ascendant. She had at 29 degrees the full culmination of the sign. Mars made a very tight conjunction to her ascendant. Mars also she had at 29 degrees in the first house, just a little bit past her ascendant. And I mean, it did modify the placement, I believe, because she was able to utilize her energy at times in positive ways. Maybe not all the time, because Mars did have it in its fall, like I have it, but she was able to utilize it in some positive ways as well, and be able to be someone that at times had the ability to stand up for what she believed in. I think a lot of that was attributed to her having Mars in the first house in the accidental dignity. Now, don't get me wrong, if you have a lot of planets and any astrological influences that are in their fall or detriment, it can be things can be difficult in terms of utilizing the energy properly, but you have to look at the whole chart and look for ways and understand that energy and try to use that positively. That same family member had a number of planets that were in the fall or detriment, and she had a lot of like adverse aspects in her chart. So she did have a lot of trials and tribulations. Things were really tough, but negative aspects sometimes that makes you not become complacent and relaxed. So there are positives with that. It's just understanding that in your chart. And once the more you learn about astrology and you assimilate and you get to at least the intermediate level, you begin to understand that. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for the worst zodiac sign placement. And until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.